Alright everyone, hello and welcome back to another episode of The Road to 2000. Tonight I wanted to take you guys through some really fun games that ended quickly due to an attack that was launched with either G4 or G5 straight from the opening. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the conditions that you need to play a move like G4 so early on and how it worked in these games, and when hopefully you can try to do it in your own games for you know, just a fun quick attack from the opening. And what made me want to do this lecture is actually this game that was very recently played in the Legends of Chess tournament that is currently going on Chess 24, and this was of course a game between Magnus Carlsen and Anish Giri. So the game started off fairly normally with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3. It's quite fashionable to avoid the Nimzo-Indian these days. d5, knight c3, bishop b4, officially arriving at the Ragozin, and then Magnus played the most popular move, bishop g5. Black played the move h6, attacking this bishop. This is pretty much the main line here. And now there's a few different options that white can choose. A lot of players after bishop g5 are willing to part with the bishop after bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and after e3 or queen a4 check or any number of moves. You're going to get a fairly normal game for the Ragozin where white trades off this bishop for the knight to alleviate some pressure on this knight on c3. No knights jumping into e4, and it's going to be a fairly simple you know, type of game. It's not going to be the crazy complex attacking games that we're looking for tonight. So Magnus came up with a very interesting move. It's safe to call it a novelty here. Rather than take on f6 or do the also fairly natural bishop h4, Magnus actually retreats this bishop all the way back to d2. And this is definitely a unique idea by Magnus here. So I wanted to turn it over to the chat. What would you do with the black pieces after bishop d2? Let's see if you're going to sort of fall into the same kind of trap that Anish Giri did in this game. What looks natural to you with the black pieces here? Yes, hello to everyone in the chats. Not, unfortunately, a Grob tutorial. Be on the lookout for that at a later date, although I could hardly compete with Jonathan Schrantz's Grob video that he's already made. Hello, Chess King. So there are a few different choices here, and Yo-Yo in the chat is saying c5, and this is probably a really good idea for black. Just challenging the center as quickly as possible. Other moves you could consider are knight b to d7, and of course the move castles, which Michael Keating has actually suggested in the chat. The move knight e4 doesn't quite work because knight takes e4 would be quite strong when this knight is actually defending the bishop on d2. Knight e4 is a great idea when the knight is still pinned to the king, but with the bishop on d2, this move actually just strictly prevents the move knight e4. And in the game, Giri chose the move castles, which, you know, itself is not a mistake, but it was definitely sort of what Magnus Carlsen was hoping for. So let's see if you guys know how to read. If you guys know how to read the title, you'll be able to guess white's next move. Of course, Magnus, in this position, launched an attack with the move pawn to g4. And what allows Magnus to play this move here? Well, there's a few different conditions that have been met already that sort of make the timing right for this g4 push. So what conditions are those? Well, number one, black has kingside castled. That means it is fairly sensible to launch an attack on the king side where black's king is. Number two, of course, white has not castled. You wouldn't see Magnus playing like this if his king was sitting on g1. And number three, Magnus has managed to provoke this move h6. This is why we saw Magnus bring the bishop out to g5 and then back to d2. There is the potential here to just play the move bishop d2 directly, of course. This has actually been played before in fairly high-level chess, but with bishop g5 and bishop d2, now Magnus is giving himself this extra option of g4 in the event that black castles. So, why does h6 matter? Well, if you've seen my lecture on hooks, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It means that these attacks with g4, followed by g5, are going to actually come with pretty significant threats here. If g5 is allowed to be played, then Magnus can immediately capture on the h6 pawn, and in doing so will very easily open up files in front of the black king. So, all of that is to say, the timing is right here for g4. And the point of this lecture is, one, to really enjoy these nice attacking games, but two, I want to make sure you guys kind of understand why g4 is playable here and not playable in most positions. It's a very specific sort of circumstance. However, it is a circumstance that appears quite often. So when black castles, has the move h6 included, and white of course has not castled, that might mean the timing is right for this g4 push. And we're going to look at this showing up in actually a variety of different openings here, where white can attack with an early g4, or black can attack with an early g5. So all of that is to say, Magnus plays g4 here. And then Giri dove into quite a bit of a think. This was, of course, a 15-minute game with some increment, and Giri spent about 5 minutes, so about a third of his time, choosing his next move very, very carefully. A game in Legends of Chess where there was g4. Well, Chess King, I think we are looking at that game. This is what actually gave me the idea for the lecture. So we're starting off with the game from Legends of Chess. And then the choice that Giri came up with was actually just to capture on c3, and after bishop takes c3, Giri wanted to plant this knight onto e4. And this was a perfectly fine way of playing for Giri. And the fact of the matter is, objectively, after g4, it's not as if Magnus has a crushing advantage. His advantage is that he's looked at this before, and he knows how to attack with the white pieces here, whereas Giri is sort of just playing this over the board. So this is the type of move that you can definitely keep in your back pocket to surprise some opponents. Other choices for Giri were definitely to just develop normally with a move like knight bd7. You can even play a move like rook e8 if you so desire, giving this bishop some retreating squares. Or even c5 is totally playable, counterattacking in the center. Knight takes g4 might be a little bit much because the move rook g1 is sort of playing into white's hands a little bit. You don't really want to be facing these sort of threats quite so early on. For example, this is probably already just strictly winning material. Although knight e8 might be playable, once again, this is going to be a good pawn sacrifice for white. In the game, though, we saw takes on c3 and knight e4, which is perfectly fine. And now Magnus plays a move you might not expect. Rather than the slightly more natural h4, he plays the move queen c2. And so why does Magnus Carlsen play the move queen to c2 here, rather than go straight into the attack with a move like h4? Well, he's actually looking to improve upon the move h4 by doing things just a little bit more quickly. How is that going to be possible? Well, we will actually see very, very quickly how that is in fact going to be possible. Yes, also he wants to castle queenside, so queen c2 does pave the way for queenside castles and moves the queen into an attacking position. Of course, this is all great stuff, but the point is, Magnus is purposefully delaying the move h4 as well. Giri very naturally attacks in the center with the move c5. We see d takes c5 by Magnus Carlsen, opening up this bishop as well into the attack. And then Giri plays the move b6, which is very, very natural once again. He just wants to take back on c5. He is not expecting Magnus to capture on b6, as after a move like a b6 or queen b6, it's actually going to be Giri with some pressure on the queen side. So here Magnus Carlsen plays the move that successfully launches his attack with the most tempo. It goes the fastest now for Magnus Carlsen. So I'd like to ask you guys at home to try and come up with Magnus Carlsen's next move here. What do you think Magnus Carlsen played in this position? Chess King says h4. Yo-Yo says g5. And actually, Yo-Yo is going to be correct here. So like I was saying, Magnus is purposefully delaying the move h4. And the reason for that is because he wants to play g5 actually first. Now, how does this make any sense? Well, it's actually going to be breaking through even faster than if Magnus had played h4. You can think of it like this. If Magnus Carlsen plays h4 here, Giri now has time to take back on c5, and his counterplay is coming one move faster, right? You spent a tempo on h4, and Giri gets to spend a tempo taking back on c5. And like I said, counterplay is coming faster. Whereas if you start with g5, now after the move h takes g5, and you follow this up with h4, all of a sudden, Giri does not have the time to retake on c5, because you're taking back on g5 and opening up the h file. So you see how Magnus kind of gains a tempo by playing g5 first before h4. Now this isn't always going to be the correct thing to do, but in this case I think this was a really clever idea, and it's one to keep in mind when you're attacking with a g-pawn like this. Sometimes it's better to play g5 directly and follow it up with h4 to do things with the utmost, urgency, with the most tempo possible. In the game, of course, Giri did not allow Magnus to open the h file, and the downside to playing g5 before h4 is that now, by not recapturing immediately, the g-pawn does get to live. So in the game, Giri plays the move g4. And yes, Vuk has the right idea. Magnus's idea after g4 was now that he gets to use the h-pawn to plant the knight on g5. And he's actually correct in thinking that this was not the correct way to play for Giri. Giri's actually allowed Magnus a little bit too much activity now with his pieces coming into the g file, coming in on the h file, and Magnus already, I believe, has a winning advantage. So where was the improvement for Black? Well, after g5, perhaps it would have been a little bit more prudent to, in fact, play the move h5. And this would be a better try, as Vuk in the chat is saying. Now, though, I do think Magnus could take the time to recapture on b6 and play a move like e3. And the difference here is that Magnus is not down a pawn, and his attack is still coming, quite fluidly. The move bishop g2 is playable, and the game will just kind of continue from here. Magnus is going to have a little bit of pressure on this d-pawn as well, and you can sort of just go back into normal chess territory here. You don't necessarily need to be playing as if it's checkmate or bust on the king's side. Other moves you can expect are things like rook g1 to come on at a later date, the ideas of playing g6, and like I said, Magnus sort of taking over on the d4 square. That's just one more way the game could have gone. In the game, though, h takes g5 was played by Giri. Now after h4, g4, knight g5, Giri's only move here to try to save the game is actually f5. No way you can actually capture this knight, opening up the h file when this is just going to be totally disastrous for Black. So f5 played in the game, and now Magnus stays cool under pressure, does not kind of go crazy here, and just develops his piece with bishop g2. And this is perfectly fine. White still has a pretty sizable advantage here. Now b takes c5 has to be played by Giri. He needs to counterattack in the center. So yeah, g5, h5 might have made a little bit more sense, because in the game, rather than having a pawn on g5, Magnus got to bring this knight to g5, and that's kind of the attacker that's broke the camel's back. Sure. Meaning that this is the important piece that allows Magnus to really break through successfully here. H5 was just a little bit more, was just a little bit better, we'll say, at keeping files closed and keeping the pieces out of the game, because then White still has to actually deal with having this g-pawn on g5. Okay, now in the game, Magnus very naturally queenside castles, and Giri gets a little bit impatient here and actually does capture on g5. And this turns out to be sort of the fatal mistake. after knight takes g5, the game is pretty much over. Magnus Carlsen just wins. A better try would have been the move knight c6, when Magnus can just start taking free stuff on d5, and even a move like e3 here just keeps all of the options open now for white. Alternatively, if you try capturing stuff, unfortunately this isn't going to quite work because the move bishop f5 is going to be strong, but just a normal looking position now for Magnus. Even the move e3 first, keeping the tension here, is definitely going to be playable. And actually, yeah, no, you can just win material straight off the bat with this sort of line. Now, Giri would get to play d4 here, so I don't know if you actually want to allow this, but this definitely would still be advantageous for Magnus. So knight c6 would have been a better try. Knight takes g5, now we simply take back, and after queen takes g5, really any way to block this check wins. Magnus simply plays the move king b1, and now after knight d7, there's just no way to guard against all the threats coming through on d5. If you try something like knight c6, we still take. Knight b4, we can just take this. And even the move d6 here is winning, although moves like queen c6 are also going to be winning, maybe even a little bit faster. Queen d6, take this guy, win the game, you know, etc., etc. So knight d7 was Giri's try, Magnus takes on d5, and now knight b6 was the point. We have d takes e6 and bishop takes e6, and Magnus goes up the exchange with a winning advantage. The game did continue with queen d2, and Giri maybe should have gone for the exchange down endgame. Likely it's just dead lost, but you know, it was probably a better try than queen g6, when black's king is going to be significantly weaker than white's king. Queen d6 played in the game, f4 check, king a1, rook f8, and now I'd like to give a tactics puzzle to you guys in the chat or at home. White to move and win here. What do you think? White to move and win. Also, while you think about that, I came prepared tonight, got myself some water. We're ready to go. Water pouring class. Fun stuff. And yeah, Chess King has it. It's just a simple checkmate with the move rook h8. King takes h8, queen takes f8 check, king h7, rook h1 check, queen h6, and then we actually have a checkmate thanks to the pin on the queen. So, in the game, Magnus actually did end up missing this, and the game continued for a while, but the important part has kind of passed. G3 was played, and here once again, queen takes c5 would be nice, with the idea of the same checkmate, but queen h5 instead. And after a few more moves, we saw rook g1, takes, and here Giri decided to give up the game, as this is just a hopeless ending. Really not much to be done here. These two pawns are totally going to win the game after, I don't know, something like this even. It's as simple as it gets. So yeah, he missed the mate in 4 actually. Missed the mate in 4. Okay, so what were the key points of this game? Well, obviously, the point of the lecture is this move g4, and the conditions were just right for Magnus to go ahead and play this move. Black had castled kingside, had committed to the move h6, and white was still keeping very flexible in this game. So, alright, I want to take a look at a fairly different type of position now. And you might say, yeah, okay, yeah, this g4 stuff, it's great for rapid chess, but, I mean, come on, nobody's playing like this, you know, in real chess games. And to those of you who say that, I would like to introduce you to the man named Vladimir Kramnik in the 2018 Candidates Tournament, no less. So this is the best of the best. This is where the players bring their absolute A game, their best openings possible, and try to show something in the Candidates Tournament for that shot at the world title. So let's see how it went. In the game, Kramnik was playing against Levon Aronian. Levon with the white pieces chose e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. We have bishop b5, Knight f6 going for the Berlin, now d3, and bishop c5 by black. Levon went for this exchange on c6. We have takes, castles, and now this pawn is attacked, so queen e7 by Kramnik, and here Levon makes a bit of a mistake. Now, Levon plays the move h3, and those of you familiar with the first game might be able to tell me, you know, what is starting to become a good idea in this position. And Levon, of course, has had very rocky candidates tournaments ever since he has been at the top of the game. And in this one, I believe he was just he was pretty new to playing the move 1e4. He had been a 1d4 player for most of his life, and so perhaps this mistake comes from a little bit of inexperience. But here, actually, more than in the first game, black does have a significant advantage. So, of course, after castles and h3, committing to both of these moves when black has still maintained such flexibility, when queenside castles is still definitely a real option for black. Now, this is going to be a bit of a mistake. In fact, white should not commit to this move h3 and should just develop this knight normally, and then the game is going to continue under fairly normal lines, like this perhaps. You know, even knight c4, and even here sometimes queenside castles gets played, but more often is knight d7, and the game is just going to continue pretty normally, with black eventually castling kingside as well. What's the difference here? Well, here, black has not committed this bishop out to g4, black has not, you know, wasted any time, and now black can successfully launch his attack. So how do we go about doing it? Because g5 immediately is actually going to be very advantageous, in fact, for white. White can simply take this pawn. You know, we play a move like rook g8, but now king h1. And we're not really getting too far with this attack, right? Sometimes a pawn is a pawn. Sometimes a pawn is a pawn. Even queen d2 is maybe slightly more accurate here. So we need to be a little bit more clever than g5. So yeah, Beltran has the right move. You have to start with the move rook g8. Now, why do we want to start with rook g8 instead of h6? Well, once again, it's all about saving as much time as possible in these kingside attacks. It's about doing things, you know, with the most pace as you can. So with h6, you know, let's say c3, sure, you can play the move g5, but later you're going to want to play the move h5. So there's actually no reason to play the move h6, because you would like to bring this pawn to h5 in one step. That's why rook g8 is the move that Vladimir Kramnik chose in this game. Now Levon was anticipating the move g5. A huge problem for white after g5 is that if you ever take this guy, now there's bishop takes h3 immediately, as well as h6, followed by bishop takes h3. And the point is, this king is a little bit stuck opposite the rook, so it makes sense for Levon to play the move king h1, as he did in the game. Now, once again, rather than play h6 to prepare g5, Kramnik tries to do things as quickly as possible, so rather than spend the tempo on h6, he spends the tempo by playing knight h5. The point being, he's bringing this knight into attacking position, as well as supporting the g5 break with the queen. Now c3 was Levon's choice, trying to fight back in the center, but g5 is coming very, very, very quickly. Very, 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 very quickly, in fact. Now with c3, Levon was actually preparing a bit of a tactic with knight takes e5. So I'd like you guys at home to pause just a moment here, see what you want to do about this move. Knight takes e5. What's the idea here for Kramnik? Yeah, the chat thinks they remember this game. It was a pretty famous one. Like I said, it happened in the previous candidates tournament, so it did make some waves. So chess king. The problem is queen takes e5 is too slow. You know, we don't want to waste our time dealing with things in the center. These kingside attacks are all about speed, absolutely all about the speed. And if we take the time to take on e5, well, white can simply take this knight on h5, and now the move g4 is going to be a bit of a mistake. And so with this type of stuff, our attack is very much being slowed down. You know, d4, moves like e5 also come to mind. And white is going to be doing a lot better than he kind of deserves in this specific scenario. Maybe e5 is a bit much, and white can just start bringing pieces back to the defense on the king side. So rather than take on e5, you know, Kramnik plays g4 immediately. And yeah, this is the right idea. You just go, 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 go. Try and checkmate the guy as quickly as possible. Now, if white tries to capture this pawn, he's in for quite a bit of trouble here with queen h4 check and knight g3, taking advantage of this pin as well. So, Levon Aronian starts with the move d4, which is correct. This bishop has to retreat now to d6, and now, once again, taking this guy is not really to be advised, because, once again, it's a different checkmate this time around. So after bishop d6, Levon Aronian plays the move g3, trying his utmost to keep things closed on the king side. Now we do see bishop takes e5, getting rid of this knight, d takes e5, and queen takes e5. And now after queen d4, of course Kramnik here isn't really interested in trading the queens, so he drops the queen back to e7. And now Levon Aronian successfully closes things up with h4. So, my question now is, guys, it looks as though Levon Aronian has really successfully shut things down on the king side for the moment. So what happens next? You know, I feel like a lot of players attacking with the black pieces here would start to feel a little bit disheartened once h4 appears on the board, because it's really not clear how we get at this king from now on. So, you guys at home, how do you want to continue this game? How do you want to continue? Yeah, to bring the rest of the pieces, but where are you bringing them, right? You know, bringing the pieces into the attack is great, but you want to be doing it with some ideas in mind. You want, you know, some kind of idea in mind. Like knight takes g3 is pretty bad, right? But, you know, it'd be like an idea, right? Knight f4 maybe would be like an idea. So you want to bring the pieces over, but you want to do it with some kind of idea in mind. Try to use the weak light squares. So what does this mean? Yeah, okay, everybody is saying like bring the pieces in, but that's not really enough in this type of scenario. You can't just try to bring the pieces in. You want to bring them in with some idea of a future break that you want to make. So yeah, Usama has a really great idea, and that idea kind of goes in tandem with what Yaroslav was saying as well, and that's the weak light squares, right? White has very much weakened the light squares by these pawn moves to keep things closed on the king side. So now, rather than kind of beat our head against the wall, trying to, you know, like, I don't know, double rooks on the g file or something, we can start aiming for the move f5, as Usama is saying. Now, of course, we wouldn't want to play this move immediately because our king is rather stuck in the center here. These types of threats are going to be a little bit difficult. So first, Kramnik tries to displace the queen. But I do think it's really important to kind of understand what it is we're hoping to accomplish with our pieces, rather than sort of just blindly bringing the pieces into the game. So immediately, Kramnik plays a really great move, and that move is c5. It's just to displace this very active queen, which was causing some very serious threats. The queen went on over to c4. Kramnik develops with tempo with bishop b6. We have queen b5 check, and now c6, and the queen steps on back to a4. But now, actually, this is sort of a fatal mistake for Levon. He needed this queen back around the king side, around the center, to help aid in the defense. Now on a4, it's doing a good job of preventing queenside castles, but you guys have actually already found the winning idea here. Of course, that move is to play f5. And f5 was played in the game. Now, of course, if captures, you are actually now, in fact, asking for knight takes g3, bishop d5 check, and queen e2, when this is just devastation on the king's side. So knight takes g3 did get its day in the sun as well. So of course, white cannot actually capture this, and even if you don't see knight takes g3, this is going to be a pretty good advantage here for black regardless. Playing a move like c4, just keeping the queen out of the game and making threats on the king's side. Although, the move knight takes g3 is really the only move that absolutely wins here. So f5, great move by Kramnik. And now, somebody mentioned earlier that they thought bishop g5 was a threat, and this is what was played in the game. So how do you want to respond to bishop g5, chat room? How to respond to bishop g5? Yeah, of course, without hesitation, you should be capturing this bishop on g5. This is sort of your opportunity to open the h-file and get even more avenues into the black or the white king side. So h takes g5 was played in the game, and now once again showing accuracy, queen takes g5 is going to be a winning position here, but Kramnik finds even better with the move f4, just immediately crashing through onto g3. Queen d1 was played in the game, rook d8 activating the final piece, queen c1, now fg3, and if recaptures, just knight takes g3 is good enough. So knight a3 was played in the game, but now rook d3, and the final pieces are sort of lurking around the white king. Rook d1 was played, sorry, rook d1 was played, not rook e1. And now bishop d5 is the spectacular finish to this game. F3 was played, trying to defend, but now g takes f3. And after e takes d5, the move queen e2, rook e1, and g2 check was enough for Levon to resign this game. Even though the black queen is pinned, it's not going to help here, as this king is going to get corralled. If king h2, we take the rook. If king h1, we give this check. And then f1 queen is a pretty spectacular checkmate. Not often you see this many major pieces around the white king, but here we do see it. Okay. So, once again, the story of this game is this move, rook g8. And actually, the story of this game is this move, 7h3. So already from move 7, we see black aiming for this g5 idea. And even if you're not comfortable using this type of attacking maneuver in your own games, it's very, very important to be aware of it for this exact reason. Because the moves Levon played were very, very natural moves. There was nothing really out of the ordinary for what Levon was doing. And if you're going to be caught totally off guard, as Levon was in this game, by these ideas, it's really important to actually be considering, like, hey, wait a second, you know, I've already castled, my opponent hasn't, I'm playing moves on the king's side, is this gonna just kind of crush me? And in this case, it turns out that rook g8 is a very, very good move for black, as Kramnik demonstrated in this game. Wow, that's awesome to hear it, Mateus. Glad to hear it's helping. Glad to hear it's helping. Yeah, Great Wolf is saying he would have had hesitation with sacrificing the exchange on g5, but I think you get there eventually. In what cases is the g5, g4 idea not a good response to h3, h6? Well, it really does depend. right, taking a look at this case, this is really one of the more extreme cases here, because white is totally undeveloped on the queen side, and it's going to take him at least a few turns to get things going in the center, right? And so because white is a little bit behind in development on the queen side and doesn't have immediate central counterplay, that means this is going to be a really, really good version for black, which is why black has an advantage. If we jump back to our first game, here we see that black is still slightly underdeveloped on the queen side, but, you know, white is not really developed with this bishop either. And this was still, you know, a reasonably good scenario here for Magnus. So the answer is, a lot of the time, it's actually going to be a playable idea. It's not always going to be, you know, better for white or, you know, black, conversely, as is the case here. But if it's going to be playable, you know, that really just depends on if, you know, the opponent has castled, if the opponent has committed to h6, and if your pieces are in reasonable position to sort of support these kind of attacking ideas, as they are in this case for Magnus. Now I wanted to look at a third game for you guys here, if we've got the time. Looks like we do. Oops, a little bit of a spoiler there. We have Alexander Morozevich against Ruslan Ponomariov. And this game, I believe I know where this game is from. Do I know where this game is from? Where's this game from? This is from a Tal Memorial tournament in Russia. So still classical chess. Oh, well, Great Wolf, I think the Najdorf is sort of an exception to this idea, because the Najdorf lines where white plays g4, you actually sort of just expect it, right? Like, the Najdorf is an opening where white is, you know, already supposed to be attacking on the king side in many, many, many lines, and so g4 kind of fits in there. I'm looking at cases where it's kind of out of the blue, kind of unexpected. Is the endgame class today? Yeah, so the endgame class is also right after this one here on YouTube. Yeah, g4 in the Sicilians is just always going to be a thing. Well, let's jump into this game now as well. We have d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, queen c2. So even in the classical Nimzo-Indian, these g4 ideas can crop up. We do have an early castles by black. Now knight f3, c5, we have d takes c5, knight a6, and then at the time, the move that Morozevich played was actually a bit of a novelty. It has been played a number of times now, but I think when he played it, it was a novelty. And that move is the slightly counterintuitive c6. The point being, this pawn is sort of dead anyways, and so Morozevich is just sort of giving it away in order to force black to sort of recapture with one of the pawns rather than, you know, more naturally the knight or the bishop. So we have c6, d takes c6, and now a3 is challenging this bishop. Bishop takes c3, queen takes c3, knight c5, and from here, white develops pretty naturally with bishop e3. Well, maybe not super naturally, depending on who you ask, you know, guarding or blocking in this e pawn, but in this case, it does make a lot of sense, gaining tempo on the knight. We have knight c to e4, queen e5, and now b5, threatening the queen side. And of course, what should white play in this position? Is c6 a good move? Yeah, c6 is a playable move. As with most lines in the Nimzo-Indian, if black plays well, white won't get an advantage, but that's just because chess is a draw. White definitely isn't worse after c6. Chess King wants to play knight g5 and then g4, and Beltran just wants to play g4 immediately. And so the idea here is actually just going to be the immediate g4. If you want to take on b5, this is perfectly fine as well. I would not advise going queen takes b5 though, as now it's actually going to be black with rapid development and sort of, you know, an attack appearing out of nowhere. Maybe white is probably still fine after queen takes b5. I'm not even sure which of these moves is better. They both kind of look good, you know, challenging this bishop. Let's just go with natural development. This queen is probably coming back to e5, and yeah, I'm not sure from here. Maybe bishop c6, and it's just going to be a game, you know. g4 now is probably a bit too late, as we have defended this knight. So I do like the immediate g4 by white. This is going to be the best move here. And in fact, white is already very, very close to winning. And now this is definitely slightly different circumstances than what we had seen in the past. So why is it that white can play g4 here when we see that black hasn't actually committed to this move, h7, h6? Well, the reason for this is the reason h7, h6 is sort of, you know, good for white in cases where he wants to play h4 is because the move g5 is now going to come with a threat to the knight as well as a threat to the h-pawn. And so black isn't really going to be able to deal with both of these threats if g5 is allowed to be played. Now in this case, rather than having the threat of g takes h6 after the move g5, we do have this threat of queen takes e4. So in fact here, white is sort of giving up the threat of g takes h6 because black hasn't played h6 yet, but he does have this threat of queen takes e4, so it is going to be a very, very advantageous version still. And the fact of the matter is, black simply has no way of dealing with the awkward placement of these knights. If you try something like knight d6, rook d1 is immediately just picking up this piece. If you try something like queen to d6, well, now after g5, queen e5, knight e5, let's say knight e8, for example, bishop g2, and this is sort of just dead, lost already. I guess we can take b5, we can take c6, we can kind of do whatever we want here. Things are going to get pretty nasty pretty quickly. So in the game, Ponomariov actually goes for the move c5. Now the move g5 is still quite strong. Queen a5 check was his idea with the move c5, but after b4, cb4, Morozevich simply collects this knight on f6 and is up a full piece, kind of for nothing. And he does go on to win this game very, very easily. Rook g1, g6, rook d1. We have takes, and the move c6 is played for a second time in the game. It's a little bit unnecessary here, but still fun stuff. We have takes, rook g4, takes, and now the idea of playing c6 was that knight e5 is coming with threat to the bishop. We still see knight takes c6, and bishop g2 is a clever idea to sort of indirectly defend this rook with the counter threat of taking on e4. And after a few more moves, this game was resigned. Well, I guess a few more moves, but up a piece is up a piece, right? And here, Ponomariov simply resigned. Was watching it 2 times. Well, glad you're with us now, Keegan. Hopefully, you survived the 2 times speed. Okay, so what happened in this game? Well, it actually turns out black sort of fell into this opening prep with this nice move c6 by white. Let's see, right here. Actually, no. That was the second time c6 was played. Right here on move 7, the move c6 by Morozevich. And with this idea, Morozevich got such a crushing advantage in the central placement of his queen and his active pieces that he was also able to launch this early attack with g4 rather than castle. So nowadays, everybody and their grandmothers play the move b takes c6 to support the center with a move like d5 rather than d takes c6, which is just going to be a little bit loose without this d pawn here to control the center and to sort of block any attacks along the open d file from white. And that's how we saw after a few moves, knight c5, bishop e3, knight e4, queen e5, and now b5, walking into the move g4, when this open d file is actually playing against black rather than for him. Imagine if this b pawn were on d5, and this game might be a slightly different story. So, as I said, the conditions here were slightly different for g4 to be played, but the idea is kind of still the same. The idea is you want to play g5 with kind of two different threats. In this case, the threat is to the knight on f6 and the knight on e4, rather than to the knight on f6 and the pawn on h6. And so because of that, white got a very, very nice attack in this game and was immediately just sort of winning a piece. Okay, well, with that in mind, I think we're going to head on over to yet another game. This is one between two... No, I don't want to do this one. I want to do this one instead. All right. Do I want to do this one instead? I think I want to do this one instead. This one is a game between... I forgot his first name, but his last name is Matlakov. He is a Russian player who actually peaked well over 2,700. I think somewhere around 2,730. I think he has worked with Svidler a bit as his second when Svidler was making the rounds in the candidates tournament. And his opponent was famed English Grandmaster David Howell. So let's see what happened here. Here we have the move c4, e6, knight c3, d5, d4, bishop e7. And so this time we do still have another Queen's Gambit declined, but rather than the Ragozin or the Nimzo that we saw, the ideas once again are going to be slightly different. Knight f3, Maxim. That's right. I wanted to say Maxim actually, but I just couldn't come up with it. So Maxim Matlakov is his name. Bishop g5, h6, and once again after bishop h4 and castles, we are starting to arrive at a position where you could envision the move g4 being playable for white. Now the question is, do you want to play a move like g4 immediately, or should you sort of hold off on doing these types of shenanigans? What do you guys think here? It's quite possible he's a friend of Ginger GM, but I don't know. I think they are both English Grandmasters, so it would make sense. Chess King likes the move Rook G1. What do we think? So yeah, you guys are sort of on the right track. Playing g4 immediately here would actually be a pretty serious mistake. And the reason for that is g5 isn't actually going to be all that severe of a threat. You can imagine, black plays some passing move if we play the move g5. All of a sudden now the move knight e4 comes on the board. And in fact, you actually aren't threatening to take on h6. And this is sort of the key issue here, is that g4 isn't coming with any kind of a threat, because g5 is going to be met very nicely by the move knight e4 when there's going to be a very awkward pin on this bishop. So after something like c6, white could definitely consider taking and playing the move h4, but black doesn't have to play c6. Black can play a little bit more actively with stuff like d takes c4, and these sorts of play, this sort of play is going to be a little bit slow, with white kind of coming back and then coming forward, when in fact, if you wanted to play like this, you sort of should have been doing it from here. And even here, it doesn't make the most sense. Although I think it might be a playable idea here. And it looks like this has never been tried. So if you want to find a novelty, play this position. Anyways, after bishop h4, castles, g4 immediately actually doesn't make the most sense. And so for that reason, Matlakov plays the move e3 here, which is just the main move. Now David Howell plays knight e4. And also, let me explain why rook g1 doesn't quite work either. Once again, if black sort of just passes, g4 still is not really coming with a severe enough threat. For example, d takes c4. Well, maybe not d takes c4. Let's say b5. If you play the move g5, still knight e4 is going to be quite strong. Well, actually, maybe not. Maybe rook g1 has some ideas, but we can actually just take here and play a move like b takes c4. And black is going to have excellent compensation for this type of attack. Although the more I look at it, the less I actually hate it. But I do think white can sort of hold out for a better version here. So rook g1 might be a bit too much. In fact, yeah, the move c6 is a little bit silly. c5, once again, is going to be a better way to challenge things. And if you get caught up trying to do things like this, you're going to sort of have your attention diverted by issues on the queen side. So rook g1 and g4 don't quite make as much sense here. And you might be wondering, well, what really is different here? And the difference is going to be the awkwardness of this bishop on h4. This is really the reason why these ideas aren't working here. If you imagine a different position where this bishop is sort of on, you know, let's say c1, castles, here even the move g4 probably isn't actually going to be the best idea. Okay, you can imagine a move like this, where black makes some sort of nonchalant move. Now all of a sudden the move g4 might actually be well worth considering here. Because this bishop's better placed, our center is a little bit more well prepared to handle these types of immediate attacks, and you can sort of launch an attack on the king's side in this manner. Okay, so what happened in the game? Let's get to it, shall we? e3, knight e4, takes on e7, takes on e7, and now rook c1. Rook c1, of course, just preparing to recapture this with the rook rather than the pawn, maintaining the structure. And now after c6, let me ask you once again, does the move g4 make sense here, as I highlight random moves to offer no type of hint? Does the move g4 make sense? Chess King says g4 looks good here. Yaroslav is giving it an exclamation point. And yeah, the move g4 is definitely a playable line, and that's what Matlakov goes for in this game. And now, I guess we are running a little bit short on time, so we'll go a little bit quickly here. Howell simply develops his knight with knight d7. Now h4 is the natural follow-up. This is one of those cases when playing g5 immediately doesn't really make sense, because knight g5, there's simply nothing going on here. You know, h4, we'll just take this knight, and black is very quickly ready to defend. So h4 first, we have e5 now in the game. David Howell trying to counterattack in the center, but after cd5, we see takes on d5, and now after g5, white does already have a pretty significant advantage here. e4, this knight drops back to d2, and Howell feels the need to take on g5. Notably, white is stopping the move h5 here, which definitely contributes to his advantage. Queen h5 is now a key move. g6 was black's choice, and now rather than queen h6 allowing the move g4, Matlakov simply takes on g5, and the queens come off the board. But what has white gained for his early g4? Well, unfortunately, black played well enough not to get checkmated, but this g5 pawn is going to be a very nasty thorn in black's side, and look for threats to this king to sort of come later on in any type of endgame. Also notably, black has been forced to kind of weaken this d5 pawn, and it's enough for a pretty significant edge for white. In the game, play continued for a while. f3 was great to open up this diagonal to get at this pawn. Bishop d3 as well. King d2, and we have just an endgame that Matlakov managed to outplay his opponent in, with pawns now rolling up the board. And in rapid fire fashion, Matlakov did end up winning this game with some nice endgame technique. Picture of Magnus. Well, we showed Magnus's game first, so I threw up a picture of him. So what was the point of this game? And then I'll review sort of some key points in the lecture. The point is, be on the lookout for g4, but don't be super committed to this idea. You're going to need a little bit of help from your opponent if you want these ideas to g4 to work. When are they going to work? Well, they're going to work when your opponent plays a slightly slower style with moves like c6, rather than immediately trying to challenge the center with moves like c5. If black is playing very, very quickly, very actively in the center, then your play on the king side is simply not going to be fast enough to challenge the play in the center. But when black plays a little bit more slowly in the center, trying to just sort of develop slowly and naturally, taking advantage of the fact that things are sort of closed up, that's when g4 can become a really great attacking idea, as we saw in the 4 games we went over today. And that is sort of the key point of this game. Not playing g4 here when black would have very active play immediately, and white is not creating substantial threats with g5, but playing g4 here when, after black has played c6, it takes a few turns for serious play in the center to really get going, giving white time to play moves like h4 and g5, opening things up. Now, the point of the lecture altogether is, one, I would love if you guys tried some of these fun g4 lines on your own, in your own games. I think that would be really, really fun to see more of this type of game, because as it stands, this is really fairly uncommon, even though it's a perfectly playable idea in many, many positions, and we're seeing the top level players actually employ it, like Magnus Carlsen, in this recent tournament. It still remains sort of this underground idea that I feel like a lot of people don't know about and are sort of unprepared for. So I would love to see more people playing it, but also, maybe even more importantly, you definitely need to be aware of this idea as the other side. As the side with the black pieces in these types of positions, you definitely don't want to be caught off guard by someone playing the move g4. As Giri was in his game against Magnus just yesterday, I believe. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this lecture. Up next, I'm going to be teaching the endgame class. We're going to be going over a few endgames actually from the same tournament that we started with here, the Legends of Chess tournament. So hopefully you guys stick around and check that one out. If you're watching the YouTube replay, that is it for tonight. I want to thank you guys very, very much for joining me here tonight, and I will see you next time.